Welcome to Mental Minute. Ready to explore something pretty fundamental,
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
like how we understand the world and make sense of all the information coming at us constantly. That's what we're going to do today. It's all about a concept called abstraction. Bet you use it all the time without even realizing it.
It's like when you're facing this mountain of puzzle pieces, and you could get fixated on each piece, its shape, color, every tiny detail, but that would take ages. You'd miss the forest for the trees. Abstraction is stepping back to look for the patterns. It's grouping pieces based on what they share so you can start to see the whole picture emerge.
Like creating a mental shortcut. Instead of getting bogged down, you simplify, categorize, and organize.
Crucial for everything we do, learning, problem solving, communicating, even being creative. Without abstraction, our brains would be overloaded by all the data we encounter every second.
A mental superpower, then.
You could say that. What's so fascinating is how our approach to abstraction has actually evolved. Early philosophers like Thales in ancient Greece were all about deduction, starting with a big idea like everything is made of water, and then trying to apply it to everything they saw.
A grand theory and then fitting reality into it.
Exactly. Then came scientists like Kepler, Newton, Galileo. They really changed how we see the universe. Induction was their focus. They started with specific observations like planetary movement or objects falling to the ground. From there, they derived general laws and principles.
So they let the data lead them?
Precisely. Huge shift. It was the beginning of the scientific method as we know it. But whether deduction or induction both rely on that core process of abstraction.
Sounds pretty abstract. Well, abstract. Can we make it a little more concrete? Got a real-world example?
Sure. Let's take a sleek sports car.
Okay. Picturing it.
We could talk about that specific car, its make, model, all the bells and whistles. We could even dive into the engine and aerodynamics.
And then zoom out a bit.
Precisely. We talk about the concept of car in general. What makes something a car?
4 wheels, engine, steering wheel seats for passengers.
And we can zoom out even further. A car is a type of vehicle, and a vehicle is a mode of transportation.
From one specific car to bicycles and airplanes.
That's abstraction in action, creating this hierarchy of categories and concepts, helping us organize information and see the connections between things that might seem totally different.
Our brain's doing this all the time.
All the time. It's how we learn new things, solve problems, talk to each other. Take language, for example. When you hear tree, you instantly picture a tree. Even though there are so many types of trees out there,
Not thinking about every single type, just the general idea.
without that ability to abstract, we'd be drowning in details,
Yeah.
unable to make sense of the bigger picture.
Starting to grasp how important this is. So where else does this abstraction thing come into play? We talk science language about art. Sometimes abstract art feels like just blobs and squiggles to me.
Great question. That's actually what makes abstract art so interesting. It's not about copying the world as we see it. It's about using color, shape, form, texture to evoke feelings, ideas, or concepts.
Instead of a portrait, an artist might use abstract shapes and colors to capture joy or movement.
Precisely. Think of Picasso's Guernica. It's not a literal depiction of the bombing. It uses fragmented figures, distorted shapes, black and white, to convey the horror and chaos of war.
Abstraction to get at a deeper truth beyond the surface.
Exactly. And abstract art does that incredibly well, makes us engage with the world differently. Think about the underlying concepts and emotions that shape us.
Like an invitation to use our own abstraction powers to interpret the work and find meaning.
I love how you put that. It shows how abstraction helps us understand the world and also create new meanings and experiences.
Solid foundation laid here. Basics of abstraction, how it's evolved, and how it pops up in science language art.
And this is only the beginning. Abstraction is at work in so many other areas, from how we design technology to how we think about complex social issues.
So how is abstraction shaping the world around us? We'll dive into that right after this.
Look at computer science, for example.
No.
Imagine having to write a completely new program every time you wanted a computer to do something.
So inefficient.
Exactly, and really time-consuming. But that's where abstraction swoops in. Programmers create reusable code.
Oh, okay.
They focus on the logic of the problem and then create modules or functions that can be used over and over in different programs.
Like a set of tools that can build all sorts of things.
Great analogy. That's how we get complex software systems like the internet, smartphones, the apps we use every day.
Abstract code having such a real-world impact, fascinating.
It shows how abstraction isn't just about simplifying. It's a tool for creating new possibilities and solving problems in new ways.
Okay, so science, language, art, technology all rely on abstraction. But are there any downsides to thinking abstractly? Can you have too much of it?
That's a great question, and the answer is yes, you can. If we get too far away from the concrete details, we lose sight of the real-world effects of our ideas. We oversimplify or make assumptions that just don't work in practice.
Like a map that zoomed out too far shows you the general layout, but you miss important details.
Exactly. And this can be a problem, especially with complex social or political issues. If we depend too much on abstract ideologies or theories, we might not account for the real lives of people.
But isn't abstraction necessary for progress on big issues?
Yeah.
We can't get lost in every single detail, can we?
That's true. It's about finding the right balance. We need to think abstractly to see the bigger picture, to find patterns and come up with solutions. But we also need to be grounded in reality to see the potential consequences of our actions.
How do we find that balance then? How do we use abstraction effectively without losing sight of the real world?
It's about being mindful to ask ourselves, what details are we missing? What assumptions are we making? Are those assumptions accurate? It's about checking our abstractions against the real world to make sure they're still useful.
Like a dance back and forth between abstract and concrete.
That's a great way to put it, and it's a dance we all need to learn if we want to deal with the complexities of the world.
So for our listeners, what advice would you give them on getting better at abstraction?
Start with curiosity. Pay attention to the world around you. Look for patterns and connections. Don't be afraid to ask why.
Not just accepting things at face value, but digging deeper, looking for the underlying principles.
Exactly, and then practice explaining things to other people. Teaching is a great way to really understand something. When you have to explain it clearly, you have to grapple with the ideas and make the abstract concrete.
Find a friend and explain abstraction to them.
I love it. And finally, don't be afraid to play with abstraction. Doodle. Write poetry, come up with metaphors. The more you experiment, the more comfortable you'll become.
Like any skill, practice makes perfect. And the rewards are huge. Abstraction lets us see the world in new ways, solve problems more creatively, and connect with others on a deeper level.
It's a remarkable ability and one that we all have.
This has been fascinating. I have a whole new appreciation for the power of abstraction and how it's shaping our world.
It's been my pleasure. I love talking about the human mind and how we make sense of this complex universe.
Our listeners will have a lot to think about after this episode.
I hope so, and maybe they'll even see the world through a slightly more abstract lens.
To wrap things up, any final thoughts on abstraction? What's the one thing you really want our listeners to take away?
When you really step back and think abstraction, it's what makes us human. That incredible ability to zoom out, see the bigger picture, connect the dots, and create meaning from complexity.
It's like we're constantly building these mental models of the world, and abstraction is the key.
Exactly. And the more we get it, the better we can use it to learn to solve problems, to come up with new things, to communicate, to appreciate the world around us.
A secret superpower waiting to be unlocked. Well, that about wraps up this Mental Minute. Thank you so much for sharing your insights on this fascinating topic.
It was my pleasure.
And to our listeners out there, thanks for joining us on this journey into the world of abstraction. Until next time, stay curious, keep exploring, and keep those mental gears turning.